Sandy Charles with DevilsDigest.com, and I'm joined by our publisher, Rabino, and we're breaking down tonight's loss. ASU was taken down by the USC Trojans. Final score 48-17. So, Hod, as the saying goes, it's never as good or as bad as it really seems, and that was the case for both teams tonight. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at that saying going into the game, maybe some folks thought that what happened the last 2 weeks with ASU, impressive wins at home against Washington, on the road against Utah, maybe that was a little of a mirage. I mean, some people can look at it that way. When you look at USC, obviously one of the worst losses in program history on the road against Notre Dame just last week. A lot of folks questioning this team from every possible angle, and here they come in tonight and look like a total different team than they did last week, and maybe this was their best game since their win against Stanford. It's just kind of interesting because the USC insider, Chris Swanson, that did a great article for our website detailing what's going on with USC from the beginning of the season until now, what are some of the strengths and shortcomings. He said that USC played all but one good game up until now, and not that I didn't believe him when he said that, but I'm thinking to myself, so here's USC 6-2 coming into tonight, and even though they played so many bad games, they're still able to be 6-2. They're still able to be ranked. So sometimes there's no shame in winning ugly, and maybe just displaying a lot of shortcomings as long as the game goes in the right, win-loss column, so to speak. And that's what's happening with USC and with ASU. It's just a team that doesn't have a lot of margin for error. Obviously the game against Washington was really close. A game against Utah, I mean, they were fortunate, I guess, to dominate from ticker to ticker, really. But I think when it came to tonight, some of the shortcomings that really hurt ASU earlier this year, mainly poor offensive line play and poor play of the defense, especially the secondary, but also run defense too. I think those issues really came back to haunt ASU. And if you're a Sun Devil fan, as I said earlier, it's just really a cruel deja vu to what happened earlier this year and definitely what happened in 2016. When you look at that saying, I think now ASU has to make sure that they don't have the USC hangover, making sure that USC doesn't beat them next week and the week after and the week after. And maybe for USC, I don't know, maybe they have some bad games between now and the rest of the season. But as long as they're able to win those games, even playing poorly, they're in good shape. And Arizona State maybe just has to play just more complete games. And again, with not having that big margin of an error, really has to perform obviously much better than it did tonight to be in a position to beat really any team in the Pac-12, but especially a team in the caliber of USC.
Now, USC's offense ran and passed at will, a total of 607 yards. What kind of issues were they giving this Arizona State defense?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's just amazing to see how balanced this USC offense is. I mean, again, I'm going back to Chris Swanson's article, and he was laminating the fact that USC in the last few weeks all but abandoned the run. I mean, they're looking like an air raid team out there, looking like a spread formation offense out there, something that really you wouldn't expect from a Trojan team who really takes so much pride in running the ball. Well, tonight, unfortunately for ASU, was a total different story. 341 yards rushing, and that helped Darnold quite a bit. And really, speaking of rushing, I mean, maybe Darnold did not rush for that many yards, but his mobility in the pocket, granted something we expected to see, was definitely there on a full display. I felt that the Arizona State defensive line and linebackers had an issue all night long tackling Darnold, who was much more elusive than probably anybody will ever give him credit for. And I think with Sam Darnold, maybe not like an unbelievable game, 266 yards, 260 passing yards, 3 touchdowns. Didn't really, light up Arizona State in the air, but definitely very, very efficient. And again, I mean, any quarterback, whether you're uber talented like Sam Darnold or just like a true freshman quarterback just cutting your teeth, if you have such an unbelievable running game to back you up, that really, really helps you immensely. And we saw that from Arizona State. Saw that from USC against Arizona State. And you look at the explosive plays. I mean, something was such a sore subject all of 2016 and earlier in this season, and we saw it come to life again. For the touchdowns for USC, 32 yards, 37 yards, 64 yards, 67 yards. Even when they had the pick six late in the game in garbage time, it's a 37-yarder. It's just like there wasn't any really methodical drives of USC having 12, 14 plays and just going, 5-8 yards at a time. I mean, I looked up a stat. I mean, like going into, I think, the fourth quarter, the average yards per play for USC was just under 9 yards. That's basically averaging a first down every play. And for ASU, like I said, when you look at the explosive plays, it comes down to two things: poor tackling and taking bad angles. And Phil Bennett, defensive coordinator, definitely laminated those issues after the game. The fact that AJ Latu, who plays devil backer, was not able to play, Phil Bennett said that it was a huge issue. Daz Tulatazzi getting the targeting call, being ejected from the game, that was a huge issue. You put a true freshman in Evan Fields in the game, and as much as talented as he is, obviously he's going to have some mistakes in his first meaningful snaps, especially against such a talented team like USC. So those are really the issues that hampered this ASU defense. And again, if you're an ASU fan, you definitely didn't want to see those issues resurface. Like I said, it really was a cruel reminder, but that's what really happened to ASU, and it's definitely back to the drawing board for this ASU defense, who played so well the last 2 weeks and unfortunately regressed in a major way tonight.
Now, the ASU offense came into tonight's game with one goal: run and run often. But before the game, Kalen Ballage did come down with a stomach flu and did not play that much. How much of a wrench did that throw into the game plan?
Huge wrench, if you ask me. I mean, DeMar Richard, you have to give him credit, had 70 rushing yards, averaged, I believe, 4.7 yards per carry. But really, in today's college football, you just cannot have that workhorse that's going to have 25, 30 carries. And with Kalen Ballage not playing, I think that made it that much hard for DeMar Richard. I personally think it's a mistake to give someone like Nick Ralston reps before. And Benjamin, I think Benjamin did have a spark when he was in the game. But I think at the end of the day, it really didn't matter if it was Ralston or Benjamin, because I don't feel that the offensive line, going back to my earlier point, really played at the level it played the last couple of weeks, especially against Utah, where ASU was able to rush the ball for over 200 some yards. Yes, that had a healthy Kalen Ballage part of the equation last week that there wasn't this week, but the offensive line, with its run blocking and pass blocking, really had a hard time containing USC. I said earlier in a tweet that if this USC defense was battered emotionally and physically, they sure did not show it tonight. I thought their front seven was absolutely superb. Manny Wilkins had defenders in his face all night long. I don't think it was the best decision-making night for Manny Wilkins, and I think also the secondary for USC did a great job blanketing N'Keal Harry. And let's face it, even though ASU has a deep wide receiver core, if N'Keal Harry is all but eliminated from plays, let alone big plays, that puts a really big wrench in Arizona State's offense. N'Keal Harry did have that 70-yard reception, which is amazing. He had probably 60-some yards after the catch. But and Kyle Williams, a great game, 127 yards receiving. Had that touchdown at the end at halftime, which got reviewed. They're nicknaming it the Williams-Mary play, and it looked like it gave ASU a spark, because they received the second half kickoff and scored in that possession, but we're just not able to sustain anything. I just felt, again, the offensive line with their poor blocking. Zach Robinson, one player that had a really rough night tonight. When you can't get that offensive line to pass block or run block effectively, that just starts a bad domino effect, and that's basically what we saw tonight. And again, you hate to say it again, but just reminiscent of what we saw earlier this year, reminiscent of what we saw in 2016. And if you're an ASU player, coach, or fan, that's definitely disappointing to see.
Now, DJ Calhoun said in the press conference post-game that maybe they came in a little too high. Do you think that was the case at all?
I think it's a valid statement to make after a game like this, and I also think it's one of those questions that's almost impossible to answer. I don't think you'll ever get a straight answer from a coach or a player. Sure, fans and media will say that, and 48-17. I mean, you can point to the scoreboard and say, well, how is that statement not valid? I just felt, again, going back to my earlier point, that we saw a desperate ASU team come out after the bye week, after a loss to Stanford, and play as if the season was on the line. And I know it might be weird to talk about a USC 6-2 team still ranked in the top 20 as being desperate, as being hungry, but that's exactly how they played tonight. And I think it's almost like USC gave ASU a dose of their own medicine when you look back at how ASU played the last two games. So it wasn't some cockiness. I mean, there probably was, but again, I just saw a team in USC that was much hungrier and much more desperate than Arizona State was. And maybe Arizona State thought that that loss to Notre Dame was creating some kind of hangover to their game tonight in Tempe. Obviously, that was not the case.
So what's next for the Sun Devils?
Well, I mean, I still stand by my statement that I made not only in previous weeks, but even before the season started. November, in my opinion, is set up for Arizona State to make a run. Obviously, they have to play much better than they did tonight. That goes without saying. But what you saw against Utah and Washington, I still don't believe that is a fluke. I still think it's a level of play that Arizona State can aspire and can really execute at the end of the day. So I feel that the season is definitely not lost. Is the Pac-12 South race lost? Absolutely. Is a winning season lost? Is it being bowl eligible lost? Absolutely not. I think we'll know that answer much better in the next week or two. But I still feel that Arizona State, if they can just pick themselves off the mat after tonight and really need to make a run in November, I think again the schedule is set up that way. I said earlier in a tweet, you have to make sure that USC is not going to beat you beyond tonight. And what I mean by that is just not to have a hangover from this game. You almost want to say, burn the game film. Forget about watching it. But obviously, there are some lessons to take from this game. But just like ASU could not afford itself to harp on all the great things they did against Washington and Utah the last couple of weeks, they also really cannot let the poor play from both sides of the ball really bringing them down in weeks to come. So I think Arizona State showed earlier this month that they could overcome adversity, definitely to some extent. A lot of folks called the October schedule a murder's row. Arizona State is 2 out of 3. I think it's something that you definitely did not expect coming into the season. Definitely did not expect when the calendar turned from September to October after a loss that they had against Stanford, and they're able to defy expectations, defy critics that way. Again, I feel that November is setting up for them to get a string of wins in a row, but obviously we need to see a 180-degree turn from what we saw both on offense and defense. I think Arizona State is capable of it, but a lot of work to do. There's no doubt about that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. For Rabino, I'm Sande Charles. ASU takes on Colorado next week home. Keep it right here at DevilsDigest.com for all your pregame and postgame coverage.